Today I'm going to show you how to build trailer ramps in your garage if you want to make a little side money and you have a 120 volt welder and a few other tools. First thing I do is I get my material, which is 5 foot long pieces of 2 inch by 2 inch by 3/16 inch angle. And like I said, these are 5 foot long, and I'm going to find the center point, which for 5 feet, that's going to be 30 inches. I mark that off. And that's where the runners are going to go, and that's where I'm going to start measuring them. So I make my mid center line mark, and then I mark off 8 inches on center from that center line mark in each direction. And this is going to be the location where the runners are going to go and get attached to the rails of these trailer ramps. I'm going to mark off with a square to make sure those lines are nice and straight where I'm laying these out. And the easiest way I find to transfer and make this symmetrical to the other rail is, of course, make sure the rail is the exact same length as the other one. And then just transfer the marks onto the other one while they're sitting really close to each other. That way you don't have to measure out with the tape measure on the other side. For this, it's not a super critical application, so this is an okay way to kind of transfer these layout marks. I take the square to the other side and I make sure I have some marks there so I know where I'm going to put those runners exactly. And then I start to cut out that runner material, and the runners being those little pieces of angle going in between the rails. And I make those 12 inches long. So here I am laying it out there, getting prepared to cut it. And since they're 12 inches long, the actual full width of these trailer ramps is going to be closer to 12 and 3/8 inches wide. And I'm using a chop saw to cut this material. Now you can get these parts cut out exactly how you want them at your steel supplier, but they tend to charge per cut. So I have a chop saw at the house. I figured I can make the cuts myself. It's a little bit messier, a little bit louder, um, and it does take some more time. But the money saved, in my opinion, is worth the time and mess it takes to create these at home. I make sure the first one is the length I want, and rather than laying out and marking off every single one with a tape measure, I just use the first one that I cut as a reference piece and mark off the next ones that I'll be cutting. Now after I've cut them all and I've ready to put them onto the rails, I flip up each angle for the rails so that the layout marks are now on top, and then I can put the heel of those angles and line them up with the layout marks I made previously. Now I'm just putting them in here to make sure it looks fairly symmetrical, and the runners are going to fit in between the rails. Sometimes they may need to be adjusted, sometimes they may need to be uh, grinded down to make sure everything fits and there's minimal gaps where these connections are going to get welded. And speaking of gaps, these runners, the angles have those little corners in there, and the corners interfere right there at the radius. And what I like to do is cut those corners off or grind them down, because as you can see, there's a decent gap between the rail angles and the runner angles there, and that's going to be kind of tough to weld. So what I'm going to do with this pedestal grinder, this bench grinder, I'm going to grind down those corners so that they lay down inside in between those rail angles a lot closer, and that will minimize the gap, which is going to make a huge difference when you weld these. Way easier to weld these pieces of material together with minimal gap. It can be done with a gap, but why make it harder on you when you're welding when you can just take a few minutes and make it a really good fit up like this. That's much better and going to be a lot easier to weld. You can see the comparison there. I also like to clean the mill scale off of the material where I know the welds are going to lay. Again, it takes a few more minutes to do this. It's not super necessary considering I'm going to be using a flux core for this application. And flux core is pretty good at welding straight through mill scale. But if, again, you can make it easier, why not? So I'm cleaning the zones that's going to be welded. With an angle grinder here on the rails, I'm grinding off that area where I'm going to weld. I'll be honest, this took a little longer than I really liked, and in future rails that I built, I still clean the runners where the weld's going to go, but I don't always run the angle grinder along the rails on all those little locations and get that cleaned up exactly. Now I'm measuring to make sure these trailer ramps are square, and I do that by measuring the hypotenuse of the trailer ramp here, the diagonals. And that's a good way to tell if something's really square rather than actually putting a square up on the ends of it. This is more accurate application to make sure something is square. It's by measuring those hypotenuse. And now I'm just getting those runners really close to as square as possible. Not a critical application, but I still like to get as close as I can if it doesn't take too much time and effort. Take a little pride in your work, and it'll definitely show in the end product. So here I am tacking these now that I have them where I want them. I make small tacks here in case I need to take a step backwards. You don't want to tack in something too strong, and then you're going to have to knock it off anyways when you find out you messed something up. So a few small tacks, get these in place using my Hobart Handler 140. And of course, wouldn't you know it, while I was tacking them in place, I ran out of wire. So I figured this might be a good time to have a quick tutorial on the Hobart Handler 140 and replacing the wire. Now this is going to be DCEN polarity for the flux core, and we're going to be using the E71T11 flux core, no shielding gas, 030 wire, and this is 3/16 inch thick steel. And the settings say 4 and 50, 4 being the power or the voltage for this Hobart Handler 140, and the 50 being the wire feed speed. Now those numbers aren't exact to saying like inches per minute or actual voltage, but it is just the numbers that it has set for these dials on this machine. And here I am replacing the wire with a much larger spool of this Yes Welder flux core wire that I got off of Amazon. I've been using it and it's been working out pretty good. I don't notice a big difference in quality compared to the other wire I was using, which I believe was Hobart's brand of wire. And I've been pretty pleased with it. So sometimes you find some decent filler wire off Amazon and it does the trick. So I just throw that into my Hobart Handler 140, and I'm going to put my ground onto the rail in there that I've cleaned off to bright shiny metal. Having a clean ground makes a big difference. And here's the settings I have. I set it to the voltage of 4 and the wire feed of 40, which is less wire feed than it had recommended on that interior door, but it's been working out really well for me. Here I'm placing an angle on the bottom and an angle at the top. The angle at the top is good for hooking in to a truck trailer. So that's why I leave that angle at the top with that hook. And then the one on the bottom is more for initial traction when somebody's trying to drive up these ramps. That little gap just between the road and that first angle can sometimes prove to be a little bit difficult, but adding another angle there at the bottom helps out with that small gap there. Now I'm tacking this hook into place up at the top of the trailer ramp. And I figured this be good time to talk about the Hobart Handler 140. I picked that thing up a few years ago, and it's been working like a charm on the 120 volt outlet I have in my garage. I don't remember the price of it then. It may about 400 or 500, and I'm not sure what the price of it is now. But uh, I've loved the thing. I've been using it for years, and I like flux core because I don't have to worry about the bottle of gas. I have a bottle of gas, but I think flux core is a little dirtier, um, but it does get better weld penetration and through mill scale if I don't always clean the mill scale off thoroughly. I'm still confident that the flux core process is getting some good penetration and makes some pretty good welds. Always clean your welds after you weld them up so you make sure you have done a good job. Don't leave any defects in there. Here I am tacking that bottom runner so that the initial traction, as I previously mentioned, for anybody who's trying to drive up these. And I do a thorough job of welding these out. I don't just weld the sides. I weld the peaks of the angle as well. So I get 4 good solid welds on each end of these things. Because you never know who's going to be driving what up these. You may have a maximum capacity for these things, and you can say that, but sometimes your customers might want to try to drive something up heavier than maybe it's built for. And I just want to do my due diligence with the strength of these things and make sure that no accidents will occur. And I go ahead and clean this with my chipping hammer and my wire brush. I use a wire wheel also, one of those wire cup wheels with my angle grinder, my 4-inch angle grinder. And that does make cleaning a little bit faster, but sometimes it's hard to get those wire wheels and wire cups inside those little nooks and crannies. So it's also not a bad idea to take the hand brush to it. Now here I am grinding off any sharp corners. Another thing to just go that extra mile and grind off those sharp corners in case, your customer picks these things up and then they got sharp corners, they cut themselves, and, it's a bad day for everybody. Nobody wants that. So go the extra mile, grind off the sharp corners, clean off all your welds, double check everything, make sure everything looks good, and you'll have a satisfied customer. Especially if you tell them you went the extra mile and did all these things, you know, it'll look good. In the next video, I'll kind of show you the best way to go about selling these things. Taking a look at the finished product here, I'm pretty happy with it, and my customer was too, who I sold these to. And like I said, I'll tell you the best route to go about selling these things after you've been building them. Appreciate you watching this one. Stay tuned for the next one.